We're live with an empty chair.
Yeah. You can still get, did you get it? Oh, there you go. Yeah, man. So what's going on? It's well, I'll tell you first, I wanted to put this together. Obviously, we've been on a few things together, like Clubhouse rooms and other podcasts and stuff. And I've always just, I've loved the energy you bring to this stuff. I love the passion for, the aspect of this space that you're so heavily involved in. And then of course, recently you joined Upstream, and I just thought it'd be cool to connect and hear about your story, hear about your work, and talk about Bitcoin. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's an honor to be on. I've listened to a lot of, rapid fire podcasts and a lot of John Vallis. So I've listened to you a lot, man. So, and I think you bring a lot of great insight to a lot of topics. Even when you came into the room the other day, into the conversation, you joined, I think about like halfway through, where Steve and I and others were talking, and like you contributed something that needed to happen in that conversation, like something we were missing. And so, yeah, dude, I'm really happy to be here. Love bringing the energy early in the morning to the rapid fire. So this is good stuff.
I appreciate it, man. Our first interaction was actually, you were posting on Twitter like images or videos of, I think natural gas mining of some kind. And the only ones that I had been familiar with at the time were Steve and Upstream. So I was hitting you up being like, dude, what are you doing? Like, how are you doing it? All this kind of stuff. And I feel like I might have like creeped you out a bit, because I kept asking all these questions and you were like, and at a certain point you just went cold, and I was like, oh damn, maybe he didn't want to divulge what he was doing and stuff. So I don't know if that was your experience on our first interactions on Twitter, but
no, yeah, I do remember having the thought of, man, this John guy, he looks to ask and get a lot of questions answered without giving away much. No, but I hadn't really listened to you much then, like I think and it was still earlier on, right? You hadn't really like built up even your listenership that you have now. So
yeah, well, I was just curious, right? Like I didn't know that people were doing this, and I guess of course I got nothing but questions, so I was just, and I didn't consider like that maybe you wanted to keep certain things close, or maybe I was just a rando on Twitter asking you all these questions. So
well, yeah, part of it was probably,
I apologize if I creeped you out at the time.
No, I mean, part of it was probably because like I wasn't with Upstream at the time, and so I could have answered probably some of the questions, but ultimately I would have been like answering them on behalf of what's going, like Upstream. I'd be like, yeah, I used Upstream as who built my, because I've been mining on Flare Gas. I used Upstream Data, right? I mean, Steve is the one that built me the data center and the engine that I'm using. So like that's how I got to know them. And so I probably would have just pushed you his way anyway. So I probably would have just been like, right, you need to talk to Steve Barber. But it's kind of interesting how small the world is kind of becoming, with how connected we are. But just you start to realize kind of how small industries are and how really few people kind of run the world, like how, it's really not as kind of chaotic and populated, out of control as maybe I thought, I guess, growing up and when I was in college, thinking about corporations and like the corporate world and how really big companies are run and how global commerce is run. It just seems like dauntingly massive. And then you get into industries like oil and gas, and Bitcoin's an emerging industry that's certainly growing incredibly fast. And you realize like there's not a whole ton of people out here, like and you end up running into people that are either doing the same things or thinking the same ways, and then you end up collaborating and knowing the same people, and next thing you know, it's like it's everyone's recognized in a space. And so I think like we're kind of at this fun point where everyone's finding the thing they want to build within Bitcoin, and kind of finding our homes, and then we're leveraging all the kind of like just relationships and through conversation that we've had with each other within the Bitcoin community, and like becoming a serious industry that's moving forward. And I think we're like right at the precipice of, I guess, maybe that next real push, and it's exciting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, man. It's everyone comes in at the top of the rabbit hole and you're compelled and you find it interesting, and then you're drawn towards some aspect of what this is, and this touches so many things that you're almost spoiled for choice, and you can literally let your interests just go toward whatever it is about this that you find most compelling. And I agree, like now, like everyone's starting to find a bit of a home, and as you said, what's great about all these podcasts and mixing up on Twitter and stuff, it's like you get to know who people are and what they're about, right? And what their skills are and what they can bring to the table. And especially in an industry like this, where it is still so not nascent, but it's still, developing, and it's easy to make connections. But, you mentioned that about the oil and gas space. Is that true there too? Like, you find it easy to make the connections and it's not as big and daunting as you thought it was prior, even in a
Yeah,
space like as big as that?
well, I think so. Like, I mean, oil and gas, like as a whole, is a pretty big industry. Like, I think if you took it, in its entirety, but upstream oil and gas, so the actual producers, right? The guys that are actually exploring and producing wells, right? Drilling and producing wells. That's a pretty small space, right? So in 2018, that's really how I found my way to Bitcoin, and how I found my way to Upstream Data and such. Was I was working in upstream oil and gas, and I was going to all the big conferences around the US, right? So all the like NAPE and Cuyahoga, all these oil and gas conferences that happen in Kansas, Wyoming, Texas. I've been to Midland a couple times, and at the end of the day, I was going to these conferences all over the place, and I was seeing the exact same people, like literally the same faces, to the point where we start recognizing each other. Like we're like the traveling part of the upstream oil and gas industry, right? The sales business development side, where we go to all the trade shows in all these different areas, and then all the local producers from around there come, and they check out all the new oil and gas products and services and all the stuff going on. And so I was doing that, and in the midst of that, I realized, like, wow, this is a really small industry where it's almost like incestual, to where everyone that works over here, like when they quit, if they stop working, like they end up just going over to this company and doing the exact same thing that they were doing over here, but for them. And then like their boss will quit and move over there, and like they'll end up having the same boss at a different company. Like, it's just very, and then they end up, a lot of the mergers and acquisitions, companies end up kind of blending together anyway, and they keep just reshuffling the board, where they just keep buying each other's assets, back and forth throughout the decades. And I figured out really quickly that your reputation, and you're going to get to be known relatively quickly, right? And so early on, I figured, hey, like I better make a good impression, from the beginning when I get into this industry. And I realized I have to actually know what I'm talking about. I have to actually be proficient in what I'm selling. And I was working on the production management, production accounting side, and I was not when I first entered the oil and gas industry, right? So I went to my bosses and I was like, hey, I can't bullshit these oil and gas guys. Like they're too intelligent, they're too keen, and they've got a nose for bullshit. So I need to actually know what I'm talking about. I need to be proficient at this. And what my bosses had me do was they had me start doing production accounting for a few of the oil and gas companies that we were doing production accounting for. So every day I'd be getting their grease books from the pumpers. I'd be entering in their volumes, and I'd be doing their production accounting for their on-site, operation. And from, within 2 months of doing that, I understood upstream oil and gas, like the day-to-day operations, what really matters, right? The volumes, which is the revenue, the bottom line. And from there, I was just off and running, right?
When was that? Like, did you
Early
start your
2018.
career in that industry?
No, I started. Yeah, so I jumped into oil and gas like late 2017. I think I officially started like January 1st of 2018 was my first day on the job in the industry. But I had started going to some of these meetings at the Denver Athletic Club, that oil and gas has, late 2017. I wasn't even looking at Bitcoin at this point. Like, I had heard about it. I had a buddy that tried to tell me to buy it back in 2015, and I ignored him, like a fool, right? And honestly, it was because I asked him. I said, hey, how is it produced? Like, how is it mined? And he gave me an answer that was like, he mentioned to me that it was, he was like, it's really sophisticated now. This was like 2015. He's like, it's really sophisticated now and specialized. You have to get these specialized computers, and it's it's becoming industrialized, so it's pretty hard to get into mining. And he couldn't really explain to me, proof of work, or like, what a computational hash is. Like, we didn't go into that. And so I just kind of wrote it off like, yeah, well, however it's produced, it's probably a scam, right? Like, that's kind of just how I shrugged it off. And then when I saw the headlines in 2018 of it crashing, it had just passed $10,000. It was like, mid or late January. And the bubble had popped, the scam was over. right? Yada, yada, yada. I went to investigate it. I was actually approached it like, hey, I want to know how this scam worked. Like, obviously the scam is over. It's crashing from 20,000. Like, somebody rug pulled this Ponzi scheme. And I kind of just wanted to, out of curiosity, figure out how the scheme worked. And I figured that if it was a scheme, if there was some kind of, foul play, it would probably be where it's produced. Like, whoever's producing this thing is probably the one pulling the strings. And so then I tried to figure out how Bitcoin was mined. And when I learned about what a computational hash is, right? Like how thermodynamic law relates to, computer science in the way of you can't execute a computational hash without at least some, nominal amount of energy of heat energy or electricity. And so even if, the most efficient computers, you still can't use zero energy. And from that thesis, you can then extrapolate that, with cryptography and mathematical possibility, well, you can conclude that like the amount of energy it would take to, brute force attack a password or the key to a cryptographic proof, the amount of energy required you could calculate is not feasible. And so from that you could objectively conclude, that something is secured, right? Something is not brute, can't be brute force attacked. And then the second thing you can conclude from that is that computational work is a measurement of energy, right? It's a raw measurement of electricity in some regards because there are thermodynamic limits to the efficiency, right? So I don't know. It just, once that clicked, once I understood, like, oh, okay, so computation is just as much a measurement of energy as watts or volts is, in many ways. Then I realized, wow, this is an open and competitive energy market. This isn't a scam. This is actually quite incredible. And then I also knew I was looking at the spreadsheets, and within our software of all the volumes that these oil and gas producers were wasting, that they couldn't economically bring to market. And so I knew where there was a whole ton of stranded and wasted energy. And I knew where there was this, now I just learned about this autonomous, energy consumption market, this thing you could sell electricity to. And I had this epiphanic, kind of aha, oh my God moment. And I went out on a mission to see if, was this an original thought? And like, there's no way I'm the only one that thought of this. Of course, initially it's like, I'm sitting there like thinking I'm the only one with this thought, right? I can't find anybody talking about it. I'm Googling, but I inevitably stumbled upon Upstream Data. And when I read their webpage and saw like Steve had a couple pictures up there and like showed what, and I had an image in my mind of, what I would do. And then like, I looked at Upstream Data's webpage and it was real. I mean, it was like a sinking feeling, but also man, I gotta get on the phone with these guys and see like, and because I was going around to the conferences and talking about this and getting laughed at, right? So I was like dying to talk to somebody that also thought this might be the future. That was in oil and gas.
Hold on one sec.
So yeah, I was running really, really hard.
So I want to continue on that story, but so you figure this out, you see the potential, you start talking about it to people in your industry, and then you hit up Steve. But before we get to the part you're buying it, like, what was your background to be able to look at things from an energetic perspective? Like, I know you were working in energy at the time, but you said you joined that industry in like 17 or 18. But like,
yeah.
Did you study engineering, energy systems? Did you work in that capacity prior to that?
No. I mean, I worked with, buddies that I had a buddy that had a pallet business, and, I worked with him, and constantly we would talk about redesign. And I mean, he was designing, carbon fiber pallets, and, we would, I don't know, we were like, I'm always been interested and always been a tinkerer, I guess. But that's not my profession. And I'm not an engineer. I'm not a heavy oil and gas engineer or anything, but, I think I'm a pretty quick learner, and when I'm excited about something, it's easy to learn, right? And the information is out there. I mean, you can learn pretty much anything you want to these days.
Right.
And so that's what I did is I mean, and that was my biggest hurdle initially, was when I had this idea where I went, well, I know that there's a bunch of stranded gas and waste gas. And now I know like that there's this place that, this energy intensive thing called Bitcoin mining, but essentially it's an energy market. I needed to figure out, one, how do I calculate my Bitcoin, Mario coin earnings at this point in time, right? It's like, what the hell? Like, how do I calculate how much Bitcoin I earn or whatever? And then I also needed to figure out, how do I calculate, how much electricity I can produce via natural gas, and what the cost is going to look like. I had some idea of these things, But the good news was I was in the middle of the oil and gas industry, and so I had a lot of great resources. And so, I mean, from all the contacts that I was making at these conventions, from all my potential clients, I mean, all of our customers and the people I was doing the production accounting for, I mean, they have on-site engineers and petroleum engineers that, I mean, I got their ear, right? And I got to talk with them once a month because I was doing their monthly accounting. And so I was always asking questions and things, and I inevitably got to a place where I could calculate natural gas conversion, right? And by the way, natural gas is incredibly energy dense. It's fantastic as a, you know, as a fuel source. Its problem is that it's really hard to transport. Well, it's not hard. It's really costly to transport, right? It's very, you know, economically intensive, and so whereas something like crude, right? It's great. You can truck crude to market economically, and so like that's really the issue. That's why there's all this wasted gas. That's why I was seeing these producers waste all these volumes, is because the locations of these wells were very remote, and the volume of gas, yeah, while it was significant, while it could produce a significant amount of electricity, it wasn't enough to justify laying a $50 million pipeline, right? Because you're just never going to make your money back. You know, natural gas isn't that valuable in the grand scheme of things, and so relative to how costly a pipeline is, right? And so ultimately, what I found was, wow, if this Bitcoin mining earnings, you know, calculation comes out to where like they're earning even a little bit of money. I know guys that are paying people to come in and combust their gas and do nothing with it, just to combust it, because regulators are on their back about, you know, they can't just vent the vault, they can't just vent the gas, so they have to combust it. So they're paying somebody right now. So maybe they pay me to come mine Bitcoin. Then, I mean, even if I'm only earning a tiny amount of Bitcoin, it's probably pretty attractive to you know, go see if I can work that deal, because, you know, to get paid to go earn money, to get paid to go bring gas to market for a profit, like I'll buy some infrastructure to do that. And so like, I don't even need to know the math. I just need to know it's greater than this, right? And so that's where I was stuck. And so, I mean, I was calling guys that were like genset salesmen, you know, guys at power generation providers. And you know, it's like they're salesmen, they're trying to like sell to knowledgeable customers that know what they're talking about. And I was calling them like, yeah, so how much, you know, like how big of an engine should I have if I have 25 MCF? And they're like, well, what's your gas analysis? And I'm like running through my software trying to find a gas analysis to like give them, you know, just to get an idea of the numbers. And I did that for a while, right? I just had to go figure it out. So I just went and figured it out, and inevitably I got proficient, right? I got proficient at understanding what the economics look like. You know, I understand really well the trade-offs between miners. I know what a miner should be priced at. All that stuff came from just running the numbers over and over and over again, and seeing if this was viable, right? Because I kept proving it to myself and then getting laughed at by people that were smarter than me and wiser than I am, and certainly in oil and gas. And then I met Steve, and it was like this weight just lifted off of me, because when I talked with him, it was like finally like somebody that is as excited and thinks that this is worth building. And he was way ahead of me. I mean, he was years ahead of me. He'd already built iterations of his data center, and I was like, man, like there's no way it's going to cost me less and be, you know, I'm going to spend less time building a data center. I should just have this guy do it, because he's already built like a dozen or something, you know, that he's tinkered with, and now he's got like a formal iteration that he stands by, and his cost, like there's like let him do it, and I'll go out and try to find some gas to negotiate and such. So I mean, it was just kind of, you know, I was excited by an idea and I was compelled to get involved. I felt like the window of time was closing. I felt as though like, yeah, while I was getting laughed at, and these guys were definitely not gonna, no oil and gas producer in 2018 really was gonna even wanted to talk about buying a magic internet money machine, right? I mean, they just weren't gonna talk about spending 50 grand on Bitcoin computers like that. Just, they'd literally just hang up the phone. But I knew that they were going to come around, that if Bitcoin did what I thought it was going to do, if Bitcoin was what I think it is, price is pure signal, and it's the ultimate manipulator of opinion, and price will change their mind, and they'll come around, and they'll come to a point where they won't need me, they won't need my money or my infrastructure. They'll be comfortable taking the risk themselves and buying these magic internet money computers, and they'll become Bitcoin miners because it's in their best interest to do so. And then I'll get squeezed out, right? That was my fear. I was like, I'm not going to be able to get any exposure to this. Like, I'm not going to be able to cut a deal with an oil and gas, producer, because they're going to be willing to mine Bitcoin themselves. They don't need me to come and purchase the infrastructure they're too scared to buy. So in 2018, I was running. I was like, I gotta, make a deal before they get comfortable with this. Now, obviously, I was just too excited. Like, I could have waited a long time. I mean, even today, like, as much as there's a ton of excitement and my phone's ringing off the hook, and I'm talking to tons of oil and gas producers, a lot of them are pulling the trigger. It's still a really slow process because, this is all new.
The companies move slowly.
Well, yeah, and this is really nascent. Like, this is, I mean, if you really think about mining as an industrialized kind of, almost like corporately competitive, right? That's only really been the last 5-6 years. It's been, Bitcoin mining has always been really competitive, but it's not to the point where guys are building engines for it, right? And so I think, obviously you needed ASICs to happen before that ever took place. So I think we're right at the beginning of this decade-long, kind of land grab to bring on hash rate, because so many entities have wasted and stranded energy that, Bitcoin looks really good right now.
Yeah, it's such a, like, it's its own rabbit hole in itself, and like there's so many. It's so exciting to think of the possibilities of where this might go, and I want to hear some of your speculation on it. But just to close the loop on the story, so you bought a hash hut or something from Steve. Were you offering services to like other oil and gas companies at the time, or were you just mining on your own well or energy source or something like that?
No. So that was another beauty, is that Steve actually found gas that he could host for me. So like, it was, yeah. So, when in the midst of that, he was like, because part of it too is I have a small operation. So, I partnered up with my dad. I needed some capital, right? I wasn't going to go sell my Bitcoin to go mine Bitcoin, right? I ran those numbers and it sucked. Okay. So it was like, that wasn't good. I needed a way to leverage my Bitcoin holdings. And I didn't want to deal with a block fire, especially like, 2018, any kind of lending services out there. Plus price was chopping all over the place. And it was like, I knew I was going to get liquidated and wrecked. So I went to what I thought would be the optimal way to use my Bitcoin to fundraise, which would be to leverage it for equity in a company, right? That somebody else brings capital to. And so that way I don't have to sell it, and I get to, if my thesis on Bitcoin plays out, I feel the win, right? From the price appreciation. And so that's what I did. My dad, because he's my dad and he loves me. And he thought it was a good idea, even though he thought it was an off the wall idea. And he's told me since, he told me about $30,000 Bitcoin. So about, back in January, he told me, he finally admitted, he was like, I gotta be honest, I thought, every dollar was gone. Like, when I invested it, I expected to go broke. I expected to lose everything.
Oh, God love him.
I was like, well, I'm glad he's like, I was confident in you. He's like, but the way in which I invested was such that, like, I didn't expect a return. But we got it. Was out of love, right? Yeah, it was more out of love than it was out of capitalism. But capitalism prevailed nonetheless. So I think he, now I'll say that's a whole nother dynamic. It's really fun having my dad's a boomer. He's about 70 years old. And having him involved in this and getting to talk with him about it, because we have a business, and we're mining. It's like I get to, update him on the total hash rate of the network and stuff. And like to watch him slowly kind of start to understand it. And then to watch him, like, sometimes we're at like, a family get together and there's like friends in town, and then my dad will just answer someone's question before I do. And it just kills me,
So he grokks Bitcoin pretty well right now.
Yeah, he's a bull. He's definitely a Bitcoin bull, right? He thinks
it's so fun.
It's great. His thing is he's very, he's a patriot, right? He's very, pro United States of America, and so part of his dilemma is, one, he sees that it undermines the U.S.'s ability to, kind of shake their weight around the world, right? Really, their way to just sanction and rob people to some degree, right?
Yeah.
Being frank. And he sees that it's probably going to be an enemy of, the Federal Reserve Central Bank. And like, he thinks the U.S. is pretty powerful. And if anybody, if anything can stop Bitcoin, it's probably, the crazies that got elected But
So he
he's a
hasn't
bull.
passed the event horizon yet, but he's a bull.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I don't think he will, man. I think so. There's something about, there's something that he'll. I don't know if he'll ever get to the point where he really sees, the way I see it, right? The way I see Bitcoin disrupting centralized powers. Like I don't think he'll see it that way. He kind of, he almost kind of scoffs or giggles when I say things of that nature. But he sees my point, right? Because there's a strong argument for it. But I think he just, you know, I'll tell you that I bet you he's more convinced of it at 55,000 than he was at, when we were mining at 5,200. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's funny you say the family dinner thing, man, because the exact same thing has happened with my dad. I've been talking to him about it for years, and this fall, like the MicroStrategy news and all that kind of stuff, he kind of, it perked up his ears, and now, like, when we're sitting around on a Sunday dinner or something like that, the subject will come up, and, like, of course, for years I've been the one that's trying to tell this to everybody, and someone will ask, and then I'll just kind of look over to him, and he'll be like, I got this one, man, I got this one. And to his credit, man, he's like, he dropped a line several months ago now, but he was like, he was in conversation with someone, and he said, like, Bitcoin is like the underground railroad to freedom. And I was just like, the fuck?
You're like,
like,
okay, so
shit,
real quick, Dad, I think
that's
I gotta
good.
tweet you. Yeah.
I did tweet it.
Oh, you have
People
to.
loved
That's
it.
too good. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
way too good.
So he's fully orange pilled, and it's amazing to see. But coinciding with that, like, you kind of can't be orange pilled without seeing how bad things are in the legacy world, right? It's kind of like, it's tit for tat, right? The more you get orange pilled, the more you become disgusted with the way things are in many ways, and so that's happening to him too. So that, I mean, that's its own emotional thing to stabilize in itself, right? Because there's a certain ignorance is bliss component of people who think like the world works the way that it should. And when the whole matrix metaphor, right? When you come out, the matrix has the good meat and it all looks great and everything, but you come and you're in the ship and the food is crap and it's all gray and cold, and so I think everyone has to go on that journey of, like, finding, I guess, peace, or like allowing the hope of what could be to kind of console you about the things that are going on that are not so positive.
Yeah, but I mean, I go back and forth on that, because at the same time, I understand my dad's perspective of, he's like retired for the most part, right? I mean, this is his time to hang out with grandbabies and, like, wake up early and read the books he wants to read and drink really good coffee. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't the time to be taking, like, crazy risk and,
revolutionary.
Like, yeah, like why start the revolution at 70, bro?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, like, please start the revolution after I'm gone. You know what I mean? Like, like, just,
of
like,
course,
I mean,
of course.
Yeah, so, like, I don't blame him on that regard. Like, I don't blame his. I wouldn't ever give him any crap for any kind of, like, lack of enthusiasm. And because part of it too is, and I get frustrated because, like, I'm so excited about this, and then we start winning, right? And when we start winning, I get more excited, and then it's like, and I almost get, like, frustrated. Like, why aren't you as excited? Why aren't you as amped up as I am? Which is, like, I mean, for me, it's just a foolish thing to expect out of somebody else. But
yeah, he's like, because I'm 70, bro. It happens.
Yeah, it's like, because I've done this before. Like,
jaded.
I already, yeah, like he already has exciting, business, days of working hard and competing. Like, now he's feeling the rewards, and I get that, because I sit here and I'm like, man, I want a part of my life probably to be the time where I, like, honestly, I could care less about the revolution. You know what I mean? Like, I think I almost want that personality at some point in my life, because it does wear on you, man.
Well,
I mean, to
of
have
course
to,
you do. Of course. I mean,
yeah.
you don't want the revolution for the sake of it. You want it because you think it's necessary and right and good. But I think we all dream of the time later in life where we can sit back on the farm and, do whatever the fuck it is that brings us joy, with the people that we love. That's the ideal life for me, at least. And I've heard a lot of people echo the same sentiment. But, and in many cases, when I often think about the times we're in, like, I don't at all want to be in revolutionary times. It's just the times that we find ourselves in. Like, I would prefer the peaceful, boring life, to be honest. Like, spend time in nature, spend time with people I like and
Agree.
love, do things that bring me joy. Like that's the shit I want. Like I would
Yeah,
rather
like
not
yeah,
have to.
watch the kids laugh. I mean, that's, you know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like,
100%.
go watch the kids go do it, right? Go watch the kids have fun and take life seriously and, you know, find their own way and then, you know, support them and such. But like, you know, enjoy your day.
But you can't help the times that you find yourself in though, right? And I think we're in like times of great change and also great opportunity. And so, you know, here we are participating in whatever way we think is most meaningful. But I'm definitely hoping once the dust settles, you know, that cabin in the woods with animals and good food and good people, that, you know, that's what I'm about.
Same. It's and you know, I want to have sovereign money and sovereign power, sovereign electricity, sovereign travel, and just let me live my life.
Few
Hopefully,
heads
go
of
live
cattle.
yours. Yeah.
Yeah.
You
When
know,
you
I'll take
first
care of
got
my
into
own.
all this, speaking of the revolutionary like component of all this, you came at it from an energy point of view. Like, when did you understand that this was more, you know, when did the picture fill out beyond the opportunity of taking energy and converting it into magic internet money?
It's a good question. And that way, I think maybe my journey to Bitcoin was maybe a little bit different because I found like Bitcoin Twitter and some of the podcast content and such after I had already kind of like, I don't know, gotten really excited about
Rocked it.
Bitcoin and certainly, yeah, I'd gotten certain and already bought it, right? I'd already purchased Bitcoin. But it wasn't until a few months later that I ended up finding Twitter because every time I was Googling stuff about news and every article I was reading was referencing tweets and things. And I was like, what? So I mean, I was like, what the hell? Like Bitcoin lives on Twitter. So like I wanted Bitcoin information. So I had to make a friggin' Twitter account. And so like, I mean, the only reason my name is Denver Bitcoin is because, you know, I figured I'd talk about Denver and I'd talk about Bitcoin. Like that was literally my thought process behind that.
Makes sense.
Yeah, because I'm in Colorado. I was like, Twitter's good for local stuff, like, you know, when there's stuff that's going on, it's live or whatever. And I was a little bit more, you know, kind of involved in having a political voice. I think that, you know, I was engaging in that nonsense debate. But when I found Bitcoin Twitter, and I think when I started listening to some podcasts, right, when I started listening to some Pomp podcasts, you know, back in 2018, I think it was pretty early on. He was, you know, he was still advertising for like the coin mine, you know, back in the day. And it through that process, through that dialogue, right, through having my own ideas about the world and about money and about, you know, I mean, I kind of looked at Bitcoin similar to you know, to gold only because I came from this mining side, right? I understood, you know, the scarcity was on the forefront of my mind, obviously, because of, you think about the block reward and the halving, you know, the monetary schedule. But I wasn't really in the camp of like investing into Bitcoin as an equity to, you know, I didn't think about it like that. To me, and I think that saved me from a lot of like scams and like going down the shit coin rabbit hole, if you will. I mean, I didn't save me entirely because I honestly thought that like Litecoin was maybe a test net because it was, you know, just a, you know, copy paste, but I didn't really think it was going to have all that much value. But I even bought into the like silver to gold kind of conversation for a minute. But it wasn't until people challenged that, right? Until I went out and I saw people like, yeah, but actually Litecoin's, you know, like totally worth nothing. And, you know, and then I'd see that and I'd be like, well, you know, and then like inherently, I mean, it's natural. Like if you
Fuck
own
you,
something,
man.
yeah, exactly. Fuck you. No, if you own something and somebody says it's not worth anything, like there's like this like defensive reaction, like immediately, right? And usually
Sure.
what people,
It means you're wrong. It
well, right,
implies that
usually
you're wrong, right?
exactly, it implies that or you're a fool, right? That you know,
Right.
wasted value, right, on something. So, you know, I think people's initial reaction is to go attack the source of that, you know, whoever's saying that thing doesn't have value, they're going to attack that person rather than attack why it has value, right? Rather than attack the argument, right? And so and then I noticed that I was like, well, that's not like just because that guy's, you know, a terrible human being doesn't mean Litecoin has any value. And so it doesn't mean he's wrong. So like, and then I just kind of dove into it, and honestly, the more I mined, the more I realized, you know, what was going into to sustain the Bitcoin network. And then I read the history. I read the history of how they tried to increase block size, and how the miners predominantly were in support of increasing block size, but how all the node validators kept them in check. And so even the miners couldn't take over the network, even though I think they had like 85+% of the hash rate. But node validators, just were able to still enforce consensus to Bitcoin's white paper. So I don't know. It was a long time, but somewhere in 2019, I'd say I realized, wow, this is like, the central bank has definitely been robbing everybody, certainly since we left the gold standard, but even before then it was pretty awful. Read the Bitcoin standard, read the sovereign individual, just kind of mind-blowing. I was already kind of a rugged individualist as it was, but understanding the principles behind it and really looking at the macro impacts of what individualism brings, right? The kind of prosperity that individualism can bring. It's a sound argument, in my opinion. So like, and then I started seeing even just whispers of you got to remember, this was just right post ICO, and altcoins are trying to remain relevant. And one of the ways in which a lot of these other projects try to remain relevant was they started whispering and talking about Bitcoin's energy use, right? And its environmental impact. And that's when I was like, okay, so I need to engage in this debate, because this is nonsense. Like, this is, first of all, people are just coming at this from an entirely, a hollow or a flawed perspective. They certainly have, flawed assumptions from the get-go. But beyond that, they certainly don't understand how Bitcoin integrates within the energy stack. And so I need to, but I do. So I'm going to come engage, and I'm going to start talking about this. When I started talking about that, then people started engaging with me. And then I started, having some credibility out there, I guess, because I was able to come back and say, well, actually, like, I'm doing this. Like, I'm actually mining and I'm mitigating someone's emissions. And that's why they're like, I'm able to mine, is because I'm mitigating their emissions profile, saving them money, and allowing them to be a more efficient producer. So actually, like, you're just objectively wrong. Bitcoin is not this giant carbon waster of whatever you think it is. It's something different, right?
Yeah, and does that narrative, do you bump up against that? I mean, because working in the oil and gas industry, I imagine most people share that perspective, right? They're not people that are opposed to it because, they're working in it. But, outside of that industry and, online and in really horribly written articles for mainstream publications, like, there's a lot of that energy, CO2 FUD coming Bitcoin's way. And it seems like that's going to be a big part of the FUD narrative. This is what we were discussing the other night. But do people, is that something that you bump up against in the day-to-day work and mix it up with people in the industry? Or is that just something that's totally misunderstood, and as a result, it doesn't really exist in the conversations that you have professionally?
Well, I don't really bump up too much against, like, I don't bump up against the idea that, like, Bitcoin is this big energy waster, or like, but the guys I'm talking to, the oil and gas producers, right? They understand that Bitcoin demands a lot of electricity, right? They understand that server farms in general, these are really intelligent, well-read guys. Some of the, you could call them old timers, or, kind of long time oil and gas guys that are maybe a little bit more tech phobic, right? But even they understand that, all the emails and everything that are happening around the world, it's really just these big, massive computer farms, right? That suck up a ton of energy, and coal plants and natural gas plants are providing them with electricity. But what's exciting when I talk to these guys, and what I think really gets them excited, is a couple things. One is the lack of counterparty risk, but two is that emissions mitigation aspect, right? Because they see the writing on the wall. Even the guys in Texas are, they know that at some point there's going to be regulation that comes in and comes after them for their flare specifically. And there's a lot of gas being flared, like enough gas in the United States. We could say enough gas in North America, I think, to power the network 4 or 5 times over. Currently, right? Like, it's a ton of wasted gas. Now, how much of that gas is is viable to combust without like having to treat it, without having to maybe, purify it or clean it up a little bit, scrub it. I'd say a significant percentage, but it's not all of it. So I'd say, but still, there's seemingly endless amounts of gas, certainly worldwide. And so what gets them excited is the fact that they know that they inevitably are going to have to solve, deal with this issue. And now the fact that they can get ahead of it and that they can turn into a revenue stream, like that it's actually economically sustainable for them to mitigate their flare, that they, naturally now they're going to want to not flare, is really exciting, right? And it also takes away the counterparty of the pipeline, because a lot of guys just have really bad gas contracts out there. Oklahoma is a great example of this, where there's guys out there where they're pissed, honestly, and they're thinking about just shutting in their wells. They're thinking about just capping their wells until gas prices get better, because right now they're on the margin. They're essentially giving their gas away for free to the pipeline, but they have nothing else they can do with it. And oftentimes there's maybe enough crude oil coming out of the ground that they don't want to shut the well in, but ultimately they're going to end up shutting it in because they have a bad contract. They look at this as a bargaining chip as well as a defensive tool if anything goes wrong with the pipeline company, which oftentimes can happen. So now, these upstream producers come to the table and they say, hey, pipeline company, like, if you don't give me a good price for my gas, I'm just going to mine Bitcoin with it. And so take your pipeline and have a nice day. Whereas before it was pretty much the pipeline guys would come to them and say, hey, you're going to sell me your gas for this price, or what are you going to do with it? Right? You're just going to burn it. Like, so they really, had all the bargaining power. Now everyone's got to play nice and everyone's got to play fair. The midstream's got to play fair. Otherwise they'll just go mine Bitcoin with it. And then the other aspect is upstream producers sometimes can go bankrupt because the pipeline or the midstream did something wrong and the pipeline gets shut down for regulatory issues or something for X amount of time, and the producers end up losing, having to declare bankruptcy because part of their business plan was being able to bring their gas to market, but the pipeline guys screwed up, and so then they got to try to sue the pipeline for, and it's just it's not ideal, right? These guys want to run a smooth business, and so this is a tool where they can have this on their, at least on their belt, and if something happens to the pipeline, well, heck, like, let's fire up some miners and start selling our gas to Bitcoin, stay in business, right?
So and that's amazing. And you were saying that a bit earlier that now your phone's ringing off the hook and you're working with Upstream, of course. And we talked about like this being its own rabbit hole. Like, how do you see this playing out? I mean, people are hitting you up. The value proposition seems to be fairly obvious, even though the sale might take like some time to actually go through. But like the pitch seems fairly simple. How do you see this industry developing, and take it as cosmic as you want in terms of Bitcoin mining? Because like, I love to hear the different ideas about where this ultimately ends up in 10 plus years time.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's it's a really, really kind of a daunting question in the sense of, I think we're really just at like, we're just, 1 nanometer deep into this, how Bitcoin kind of impacts the global energy production. In terms of oil and gas specifically, I think a Bitcoin mine is going to be commonplace to the oil field. It's going to be just as common as, a heater treater or a separator or, anything, because oil and gas companies, it's going to make sense for them to have portable Bitcoin mines that they can shuffle around through their assets, throughout the year and mitigate their emissions, bring their gas to market, and essentially just be more efficiently and effectively bring hydrocarbons to market, right? If one oil and gas company can earn more money with the same amount of oil and gas, as another, well, they're going to outcompete. They're going to be able to raise more, better debt. They're going to be able to press that advantage, and they ought to win the day. And so I think it's going to slowly become kind of commonplace. It's kind of a land grab right now, right? People are rushing to figure this out. They're not necessarily rushing to start mining. They are. I mean, a lot of them are coming online, but they're rushing to run these numbers and figure out what this is, what this looks like, maybe how they should plan for this, contingencies, etc. But in the grand scheme of things, this is a lot bigger than oil and gas. Bitcoin mining is going to cause human beings to seek out stranded energy sources of all sorts, whether it be wind in the middle of the ocean or geothermal, up in Iceland, or geothermal on a volcanic island, right? That's literally just a purely volcanic island where there's no civilization. Like anywhere where power can be generated, it can now be sold. It can now be brought to market as long as you have an internet connection. And with things like Starlink, with HughesNet, with internet connectivity becoming essentially as abundant as electricity, you're going to be able to monetize electricity anywhere in the world with an internet connection. And so anybody that has solar on their house, hey, it might make sense to have 5 or 6 miners in a box in your backyard, and anytime you're producing more than you're going to be consuming at your house, like in that moment, if you don't have a battery, you might as well, a lot of people sell it back to the grid, but really they're getting robbed. Like they're not getting anything selling it back to the grid. Why not just power up some miners, and then at the end of the month, like you're going to have this little bit of scarce money that is essentially free to you, right? It was something that you wouldn't have had otherwise. So it's just a matter of people are going to start building infrastructure, keeping Bitcoin mining in mind, power generation, and all the way from the wellhead to the light socket, the electrical socket in your house. We're going to start thinking about how Bitcoin mining could be integrated, because there's so much waste along the entire stack. And I think we'll get to the point where Bitcoin consumes more energy than anything else. Like it'll be the predominant consumer of electricity in the world. It'll be the predominant energy consumption market. The predominant market that people sell electricity to will be Bitcoin mining, and then humans will be, everything else will be the rest. The reason I'm so bullish on Bitcoin is because in order for that reality to actually take place, especially considering the halvings, right, especially considering the diminishing rewards, is Bitcoin's price has got to be north of $5-6 million at least, for that amount of electricity to be dedicated to it, because otherwise it's not going to be economic for that next person to come online. If everybody in the oil and gas industry right now, if they all started using all of their wasted gas to mine Bitcoin, like no Bitcoin miner would earn any money. Everybody would turn off, because it would just be oversaturated, way too much competition to justify the price. But at a $5-6 million Bitcoin, yeah, it'll make sense to go, build data centers out in the middle of absolutely nowhere and harvest some, stranded river, whether it be a river, mechanical energy, or wind or solar, or whatever. It's going to incentivize us to go out and utilize it.
Dude, it's so bananas that we're pretty much at the place, and if not at, like rapidly moving into it. Whereas you said, like you can find a stranded energy asset, let's say hydro, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and the technology exists to turn that kinetic energy, I guess, into electric energy, to mine Bitcoin, and then to send it anywhere in the world immediately.
Well, yeah,
the infrastructure for that exists. It's insane.
No, it's happening today. I mean, you're right. Like, what a time to be alive. I mean, there could be a gas well in Nigeria that's mining Bitcoin, and at the end of every day, it deposits money to my mind, and nobody can stop it. Right? No, I mean, right? I mean, think about that. Like, and I'm all the way here in Colorado, USA, and it's instant. It's damn near instant settlement, and it's immutable. And then I immediately have sovereign custody over this gas that was 7,000 miles away, 13,000 miles away. Like, I just brought it to market and got a deposit to my mind autonomously. I mean, what a time to be alive. It's a bizarre world we're living in.
I think even us, like the most bull-tired people in the world, are underestimating how fast this could all change, or things could change as a result of this, like the speed. It's just,
I agree with you. I think I've been making this comparison lately, and I think it's perfect. Is email. And I'll talk about my dad again. He's the perfect example where you think about email, and I remember days like, I mean, I'm not that old, but I remember dial-up internet. Like I remember the you've got mail and AIM, And I remember my dad getting the first iPhone, and I remember talking about it, right? And he was like, "Yeah, it's awesome. Like it's, it's a crazy piece of technology." And he's like, "But I don't." He's like, "I just need a phone that calls and maybe sends texts. Like I don't need email and crap on my phone." But you try to take email away from his phone now, and like like he's not gonna have that. Like he'd freak out, right? Because as anyone would, because email has been integrated to the point where, like, I mean, grandparents, I think that's like the primary way that most grandparents communicate now is via email and Facebook Messenger. So like, when did email become normal? Like, when did you all of a sudden have to be pretty much email proficient to have a job? I don't remember what the day was, but I do remember that there was stories on Bloomberg about how a company is converting all of their internal communications to email. They're like, yeah, with the, like that was news, right? If they said that today, everybody would be like, what the fuck? Like, like, what do you like? Of course they're all going to use email. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like when did that switch? It just all of a sudden we woke up one day and everybody was like proficient with email. I don't know. It was weird. I think that the same thing is probably going to happen with Bitcoin, where it's just kind of seep in, and then next thing you know, it's the primary way. Like, yeah, give us your Bitcoin address, and we'll transfer the money, kind of a thing. Maybe it'll just become natural. I don't know. Email is the one that trips me out. I've even gone back and like tried to look at old like Reddit posts and things, people talking about it, and it's trippy how we forget how ignorant we were, and how, I mean, even the email interface is kind of still not very user friendly, right? It's still kind of choppy looking. But the first time looking at that email interface, it was like, nobody's going to learn this. This isn't going to replace mail, like, but
Yeah.
here we are.
Just like, even just the fact that now, with relative ease, any energy source in the world can be turned into the most useful global good. And I know there's an assumption there, which we would probably agree on, that money is the most useful good and Bitcoin is going to become money, because if you don't accept that premise, then you can see it all as a waste, of course. And exactly. I think that's the the primary point of contention with the FUDsters, is that if you don't agree, I think you muted yourself.
Oh, sorry about that.
There you go. If you don't agree that Bitcoin is going to become money, then of course it all seems wasteful. But if you believe that Bitcoin is and will become dominant money, then the fact that any energy source you can find, if you can convert it into electricity, you have access to the world's most useful, most tradable good. And that opens up a world of possibility anywhere you are. You can bring the world to you wherever you find that, wherever that ability exists.
Yeah, anybody can participate within this global energy market, right? And even the big players in the global energy market, it's a big thing, because you think about countries that are sanctioned, and countries that, like, they can't ship more than this amount of oil, they can't sell more than this amount of oil, even if they can produce more than this amount of oil, because the US won't let them through that port, or whoever won't let them through that port if they have more than this amount of oil, right? Like, they're sanctioned in things. If countries just start bringing their hydrocarbons and natural resources to market by mining Bitcoin, like, they can't be sanctioned. They'll get a fair market price, whatever, is going to be available in Bitcoin mining space. Like whatever the earnings per terahash is, like that's fair market value. And then they have a currency that they can then go settle global trade with their allied partners with. And they never entered the US dollar. They circumvented all sanctions, and it's immutable, right? And the US can't stop them. So countries like Iran, Venezuela, Turkey, I mean, Russia, they can start mining Bitcoin and settling international trade in Bitcoin. They never touch the US dollar. The US can't do anything about it, and it undermines them completely. And so it's going to reshape not just global energy production, but international relations. It's going to reshape how, I mean, think about even Iran, where they have a lot of hard targets. Like, they have massive oil batteries, oil storage facilities, right? I mean, that's really what that is a gigantic, just a potential energy, whether it be monetary energy or what, right? It's a bunch of value. And so, like, that's a hard target. You could actually physically destroy that and hurt them. But if they were to instead just burn all their crude, generate electricity, mine Bitcoin, and store that instead in Bitcoin, Well, like the US can't bomb it. They can't take it, they can't freeze it. And so it's all of a sudden, and that's the part like where I talk about my, like my dad almost having conflict with Bitcoin. Like he sees that as this like as a bad thing. And it's much like the internet, right? And I agree with him. I think like people that have, anybody that has a bad intention, any regime that I think, wants to cause any harm, like I don't prefer that they become empowered, but Bitcoin empowers, without bias. And it's just like the internet where, yeah, the internet makes criminals a lot more effective at what they're doing too. It makes, child traffickers, like, they probably all use the internet to communicate. Like that doesn't mean we should shut the internet down. It means that it's a tool that can be used for both good and bad. Hopefully, the more people are inspired to leverage it for good than bad. That's what I hope, right?
Yeah, sure. And I guess the critical point is also that yes, it can be used for good and bad, but neither gets an advantageous. Neither gets like a greater
Special
advantage.
treatment. Yeah.
Right, because like the apparatus that we have around the world today, the machinery of governance and force and all that kind of stuff, there's such a huge imbalance, and the hope is that the imbalance stays in favor of the good guys using it properly. But as we all know, I mean that gets corrupted all the time. So, would you rather have a playing field that's equal for everyone, and you let the bad guys do their thing, the good guys do their thing, and try to overcome them, on an equal playing field? Or do you have this massively imbalanced system where whoever ends up controlling it can, can execute their will, let's say, in far greater degree than anybody else, and because then you're at the mercy of the good guys, hoping that the good guys are at the top of it, and that is not, historically that's not always the case, right?
No, that's a good point. And correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of what you're talking about is kind of that compounding incentive factor where, that currently exists with the central banking system, where, those who either get crony deals, like get close to the money supply and leverage that to their own benefit, they become even more incentivized to then behave badly and cut corners to compound that gain, right? Because they're rewarded for it. Whereas I think with a money that nobody can just inflate and use to get ahead, without contributing some kind of value or some kind of work, you're right. It starts to break down the reasons for behaving badly a little bit, right? It starts to kind of dissolve the underlying incentive of something like sanctions or a missile attack on an oil battery, right, an oil storage facility. Like it starts to disincentivize things like that, and the winners end up becoming pretty much exclusively the ones that feel more benefit are the ones that are act in honest nature, right? Because I guess we're assuming reputation carries in some capacity here, right?
Yeah, and I think it will in a system that's an even playing field for all. But I mean, I guess the punchline is that there's always going to be imbalances of power on varying domains and in varying, in different ways. And I think the degree to which you align incentives is the restraint on the abuse of imbalances of power, right? Because if I'm more powerful than you, well, if our incentives are aligned, then I'm not incentivized to abuse my greater power over you, right? But if the incentives aren't aligned, then I am. And so I think, right now we have massive imbalances of power and misaligned or divergent incentives. And I think that's why we see a lot of the problems emerge in the world that we do, and a lot of the corruption, a lot of the unfairness and inequality and that kind of stuff. We'll still see, nature is necessarily not perfectly egalitarian or balanced. Certain things are stronger, faster, more powerful than others. But to the degree to which the incentives are aligned, forming a kind of harmony, then I think you mitigate the damaging effects of the imbalance of power.
Yes, you certainly don't exacerbate them, right? Which I think a lot of kind of how the systems are set up today, a lot of the legacy kind of powers exacerbate the inequality and exacerbate, I guess the despair that creates, right?
Yeah.
No, that's a really great point. It makes me think about, and I don't know how much time you have, but I did want to ask you and maybe have you elaborate a little bit on what you'd said the other day in Swan Lounge when you popped in, about, kind of input versus output, right? I think we were talking about the, kind of the carbon discussion of how, we're entering this world where everything is measured in units of carbon, that like carbon's a bad thing. So it's like the less units of carbon, the more moral, whatever the activity is. And you brought up, a point of, we should look at what our, kind of input versus output efficiency is versus, input of how much, what resources we're consuming, what kind of value that gives to humanity in its whole, and allows a prosperous future. And at what efficiency, is it providing that potential prosperous future, right? And I just wanted you to elaborate a little bit on that, because we were kind of cut short, and I thought that was a great point. I did kind of I wanted to push back a little bit, I think, but it was, I've had a million conversations since then, so I can hardly remember. But I did want you to elaborate on that. I thought it was a great point.
Sure, and I'd love to hear your thoughts afterwards. But I think my point, and I don't exactly recall what was said, but the framing of how we are affecting the environment, particularly with CO2, is always like, it's bad for the environment. It's bad for the environment. But like, I think the more reasonable or rational framing is bad for our environment. Like us in conjunction or in a relationship with the earth, because everything that humans do effectively is bad for the environment if we consider the environment in isolation. Like if we chop down a trail through the forest in a town so that there's a nice walking trail, well, that's bad for the environment, but it's good for the quality of life of the people that live there. So that's a trade-off we make. We've consumed a certain amount of resources, but it's enriched our lives, and we're happy with that trade. And importantly, that's a sustainable, trade, right? Like it hasn't mitigated or hasn't restricted our ability to continue flourishing. And the point I think I was bringing up with
it, as you say, it hasn't completely demolished the environment as we know it either, right? Like it's right. I mean, while there was maybe a marginal impact, it wasn't some kind of a total absolute impact.
Right. And so it's always, a matter of balance. But there's a question of values here. It's like, what is a reasonable use of resources? What is a valid reason for consuming resources? And I think, like, broadly speaking, an easy answer to that question is consumption of resources that perpetuates human flourishing, right? So not consumption of resources that will restrict human flourishing. We'll say, okay, we'll use all these resources and we'll be able to have something, but then we're fucked, right? It's using resources that both enhances the quality of our lives and our ability to perpetuate our lives into the future. And that doesn't seem to be the discussion that's being had today. It's just like, oh, CO2 is bad, things are warming up, and that's bad for the earth. And it's not framed in like, well, what are the trade-offs being made, and are those trade-offs acceptable? And I know people far more competent and experienced on this subject matter have talked about it, but it's like, you can decry, let's say, the fossil fuel use and the CO2 emissions over the last 50 years, and you can have some objective metrics about how that's been bad for the environment. Although I think those have become highly politicized, and it's difficult to get accurate, objective data on that. And I've seen both sides, but that argument doesn't seem to account or mention what the benefit of having done that is. Like, what the benefit for life expectancy and population size and level of health and quality of life and all those things that should be a part of that conversation. And then I think the other point being made, like, if we can continue to frame it that way, is then what is the best use of resources for human flourishing, right? So what is the best, what has the best resource consumption to human flourishing ratio? And I think almost by definition, you have to say, well, what is the most useful good, right? What's the most beneficial good in a society that leads to the facilitation of all other exchange and the perpetuation of our desires. And I think the answer to that question is money, right? That's why money is so important. Money, again, I think part of the definition of money might be the good with the highest, or rather the lowest cost to benefit ratio, right? And particularly, I think that's true when you have a money that can be recycled in perpetuity, right? When you have a good that can't be destroyed, then you have almost an infinite lifetime for it to justify the consumption of resources that were required to create it. And so Bitcoin being what Bitcoin is, as long as the Bitcoin network exists, then Bitcoin, the token, is basically indestructible. So I think what you have there is you have, by definition, the most useful good in a society, which is money. And then you have the component of that, or an attribute of that, which is it's indestructible. And so if our question is what is the best use of, what's the most valid reason for the consumption of resources if our goal is human flourishing, then I think you have to conclude that it would be a money that cannot be destroyed, that can be recycled in perpetuity. If, again, the caveat here is what I mentioned earlier, is if it actually is the dominant money in the world, it is the money that let's say the global market uses as its standard. So in, looking at things through that lens, Bitcoin is the best or most rational or most valuable use of the consumption of resources. And I think that it consumes them in a way that perpetuates human flourishing. So I think the trade-off is the best it can be. And if we believe that the consumption of resources is detrimental to the environment, and not just in a vacuum, but in affecting our ability to survive on this planet and thrive, like it's diminishing flourishing rather than growing it, then every other use of energy, every other use of the consumption of resources should be on the chopping block first, because they are all by definition more wasteful and net a lower gain than the production of money.
That's a really good argument. That's a compelling argument. I really like it. When you were, before you mentioned that you thought money was the most useful good, right? The most useful or most justifiable thing to consume resources for in terms of human flourishing, in terms of to perpetuate human flourishing. I was going to say electricity, right? Which I think is where it kind of gets fun, because I would say electricity only because it's, it seems to be the kind of the variable or the piece that allows humans to leverage technology, right? I mean, obviously you can't leverage much technology without electricity. Electricity brings technology into this like new realm of benefit, where, I think you can provide things like clean water and survivability and things with electricity first, right? It's almost like more important than water, because with electricity you can get water. And so, I think because of Bitcoin's relationship, to energy, because it's this money that is at least I would say so intertwined with electricity, with the electrical generation specifically, that we're almost making the same argument in that way. Where if I were to argue electricity, I think it almost kind of comes down to, maybe they're spots 1 and 2 where I think maybe you have a more compelling argument where Bitcoin, is probably the in terms of its ratio of resources consumed to benefit towards humanity, Bitcoin probably wins the day there. But it's got to be the most efficient. The problem is we have a movement of consumption minimalists, right? People that see consumption as purely bad. And they want us to return back to, I guess, like 1800s, where everyone just has like a wood fire in their house. And I mean, like, what are the emissions from that? I don't understand it. But the example I like to talk about is, what about any and all products and services that you consume, like they all touch electricity. They all were, the only reason that you even were able to go to the grocery store and buy a bag of dog food for a reasonable price was because whoever's manufacturing and delivering that dog food like had reliable fossil fuels, is what I would say, right? Economic energy, economic electricity to manufacture. And so in that regard, if you're going to say that consumption is like, the carbon impact is purely bad, and consumption is terrible, we're not going to flourish. We're not going to leverage technology. We're not going to advance. We're not going to innovate because we're not going to have any reason to. And Bitcoin flips that narrative on its head because, like I said, it's going to incentivize people to go out and innovate and provide more, honestly, provide electricity to everybody in the world, provide monetary sovereignty to everybody in the world, right? At the same time, because now it makes sense to go build power plants in very remote places, and wait for communities to develop, because in the meantime, you can still bring that energy to market, and you can wait for an emerging community to start to flourish and to get infrastructure built to then distribute electricity, and maybe all of a sudden you bring in manufacturing and industry, and quality of life goes up because they have this tool known as electricity. Now it makes sense to provide them with that economically, because the entire time that they're scaling up, you can be just providing less and less electricity, selling less and less electricity to the Bitcoin network, right? Mining less Bitcoin, and then selling more electricity to this emerging community. So I think people are going to be incentivized to go out and capitalize on those who are, kind of what I would say, like just left out of the picture of modern civilization, because they don't have that infrastructure. They don't have, communities that just don't have reliable electricity, and then they don't have reliable, wastewater treatment, and everything sucks when you don't have economic and reliable electricity. You're not really able to leverage the technology that's developed. So Bitcoin's going to change that, and hopefully, sooner rather than later, because I think there's a lot of places that could benefit, quite severely from it. The oil and gas industry specifically, like these oil and gas producers have a pop in their step when they start talking about Bitcoin, because it's something to get excited about again. Like they're excited to go out and produce oil and gas again because they have this like new tool that makes them more efficient and defends them. I hear it in their voice. They start getting, they go from skeptic to like they're getting a little excited and optimistic.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'll let you go in 10 minutes. I got 3 more things for you, but just to address your point about electricity, of course, like there's a chicken and egg issue, right? Like you can't have Bitcoin without electricity. You can't have electricity without steel. You can't have steel without fire. So you can trace everything back like that. But I think that the punchline is when you exist in a market that, let's say, I guess the reason why money is considered the most useful good is because in the money is represented the demand for all goods, not just the demand for one specific good, right? So you could say, like, what's the value of the demand, the TAM for electricity versus the TAM for avocados versus the TAM for whatever. Whereas money is the thing that can be turned into all of that, right? So it facilitates.
And money's the thing that gets us to organize, right? And drives us all, right? So like, what's the value of literally being able to create a market? So yeah, you're right. It certainly overarches all of that.
Right. But I definitely agree with the point, and I about the importance of electricity and how Bitcoin is going to allow for the magic of electricity to flow into more places, and for the human flourishing potential of electricity to touch more and more people. And that's what's so great about Bitcoin, in that it disintermediates all these obstacles that have been put in place in large part by regulations or powerful entities, or even just the imposition of values that result from centralized decision making, through the misallocation of resources that arise from that. And Bitcoin, is going to bring a free market to the world. And this is, one of the things that I'm so excited about is, like, people have lost a faith, I think, big people that think that big government is the answer to everything, that people's demands will determine the shape of the world. It's like, oh, well, if the government doesn't provide this thing, then how are they going to get it? And the response is like, well, do they want it? And if they want it, then the means for them to receive it will be, provided by the market in direct relation to how much they want it, how much demand exists there, what is the opportunity. And the fact that this imposing a free market on the world and disintermediating all the obstacles that would seek to restrict that is one of the most, exciting aspects of this, to bring freedom and prosperity and increased quality of life to everybody in the world, or to more people in the world, I should say. Two things. One, you got two miners next to you. I know you've been shipping out a lot of miners to different people. I haven't really followed what that's about. Like, why the hell are you doing that?
Oh yeah, so that's just me personally. It wasn't anything with Upstream at all. I found through eBay. I purchased an old miner. Like, I like to tinker with these things. I like to take them apart and look at them and stuff. And so I had seen the WhatsMiner M3, and that's this one here. This guy, which honestly, the reason I purchased it was because it's one of the ugliest miners I've ever seen in my life.
Why aren't they plugged in right now? Are they broken or something?
No, the M3s they're 2,000 watts, and it's probably not too worth it here in Littleton, Colorado. Yeah, like I might be, it's probably not profitable, but it's probably not too bad. But honestly, just for where I live, like, no. But I've got, I've got
just for podcast appearances.
No, yeah, just for my own collection. But no, this is kind of a crazy story where I found a guy down in Southern Colorado who apparently he was using a bunch of S9s and WhatsMiner M3s to, he was using the exhaust from the miners to heat his cannabis grow operation right here in Colorado, right? So his marijuana grow, right? Which I thought was pretty, ingenious. Apparently I think he grew too many plants, so he got in trouble, and ended up like getting in legal trouble. But he owed somebody a bunch of money that did a bunch of security work for him or something, and he couldn't pay. So the guy took possession of all his like marijuana grow lamps and all of his Bitcoin miners. And I found him on eBay just randomly, and I bought one. And the guy messaged me, and he was like, "Hey, I'm actually, just like, if you're in Colorado, I don't know if you just want to come pick this thing up rather than pay, $25 for shipping or whatever." He's like, "I'm over here," and he was like 3 minutes away from my house. So I was like, awesome. So I ran over there, and when I walked in, it's been really hard to find ASICs, recently. It's just like, it's pure mania out there. The prices are crazy. Bitcoin's price, it's like just really attractive to mine Bitcoin right now. So it's hard to find these things. And when I walked into it was actually like at a shipping store. When I walked in there, like, I smelled blood in the water, man. I saw like all these cords and all the PSUs, and I was like, what? Like where are these miners coming from? And so like I started asking questions, found the guy in Southern Colorado, and just went and bought them all. And so like that, I just went and bought all of them. We went and bought them all. And like, so the S9s are like, he had a bunch of S9s. We're gonna send those to the oil field. So that like, is just for Upstream Data. But the M3s we couldn't use in the oil field. So I personally just bought those. And I was like, you know what, there's probably a bunch of other, Bitcoin miners such as myself that don't want to like spend $500 or $600 to buy an S9 to tinker with, just to, that's a lot. It's over 1 million sats right now. That hurts. So I was like, but I could sell them an M3 for, $250, and like, it's not about profit. It's about just trying to learn how to plug it in and tinker with it and, see what it's all about. And then, it's, I don't know. I think it's a cool piece of Bitcoin, kind of memorabilia or hardware to have a miner somewhere. It's kind of like with wallets where, you can talk until you're blue in the face about what it's like to set up a hardware wallet and withdraw a Bitcoin to it, or I guess move your private keys to offline. But until you do it, like, you fully understand, right? And when you do it, you learn something about Bitcoin. Like, you interact with it and you feel something. So it's like the same thing with mining. Setting up a miner, it's just you appreciate it a little bit more. You just kind of have a better understanding of what the hell's going on. Setting up a node.
Yeah,
same thing.
And it's funny. Like, what I've noticed is, yeah, exactly. Setting up a node. I spoke with the guy who's doing Seed Signer recently, and it's like what Bitcoin seems to be doing is, because of, I guess, the value of taking control of these things for yourself and understanding them for yourself, like it's taking people that weren't technologically inclined before and weren't tinkerers and stuff like that, and causing them to like build their own node and mine some Bitcoin and maybe even start building their own hardware wallets. And it's a really cool trend to see emerging. I gotta hop off
Yeah.
in 5 minutes, but I wanted to this is the last question. I know is probably not going to give you enough time to do it justice, but you know, I talk a lot about or I ask a lot of questions about how Bitcoin has changed people, you know, and I see from you, you know, hearing a bit of your story, but I like you got a lot of energy going on, it seems, right? Like you're obviously passionate, enthusiastic about the work you're doing, and now that you're teamed up with Steve, like I'm sure that's only been amplified. It's a, you know, a lot of really positive things are happening, a lot of interest is coming into the space. You know, what's the change in your outlook, perspective, energy, you know, ambition been like since the, you know, the penny dropped and you understood Bitcoin, and then you've just been running on this, down this rabbit hole ever since? Like, has there been any kind of notable obvious changes?
Certainly, I think there's obviously this kind of like this hope in the sky. You know, it's just kind of like this North Star kind of direction. You know, it almost brings a little bit of direction in terms of, I know exactly what I wanted to do. I mean, the second that I really you know, saw the opportunity in oil and gas, honestly, once I started working in oil and gas, I really loved the oil and gas industry, and so I thought I wanted to work there, you know, forever. And I didn't know how I was going to make that work out. But then when I learned about Bitcoin, and really once that pin dropped, I realized like that's the only thing I want to be working on. So like whoever I can provide value for, I was going to figure it out. I was going to work in this space, and you know, and there's a lot of peace of mind with it, right? It brings a lot of peace of mind. I don't feel like I'm getting robbed. I feel like, you know, a lot of the other jobs I've worked, I mean, especially in business development and in sales and marketing, especially with the way in which the world advertises today, with, you know, all of just the digital, you know, overwhelming kind of tracking, trying to get inside your head, advertising, like there's something soul sucking about it, right? There's something that just doesn't feel very
100%.
good. I don't feel like I'm, you know, to quote you, right? I don't feel like I'm contributing to the flourish, you know, human flourishment. I feel like I don't know. It almost feels like scheming. It feels like a facade. It feels kind of fake. It feels crony. I don't know. And it just it doesn't fire me up. And so, you know, now I feel as though, you know, I'm you know, working, I'm contributing serious value, right? And most of what I'm doing is educating guys who are smarter than me, just about why they should take this Bitcoin, you know, network seriously, and how it's in their best interest, and how they can leverage it. And then we help them, we help build tools to help them leverage it. But ultimately, I get to educate guys on something I'm passionate about, and it brings them a ton of value. And so for that, I mean, it's hardly work, right? It's easy to schedule 10 calls in a day, because like it doesn't, I'm not dreading them. In fact, sometimes I'm like, I'm probably too excited for the phone call. And so like, yeah, it's like I probably come off a little strong sometimes. I can't help it. But it's, you know, which
it's amazing.
I mean, it's definitely translated my happiness. You know, plus I mean, I have a lot of freedom that way, right? Which is, I mean, also a testament to Steve Barber, right? Steve, like, you know, when he hired me, he's like, I don't micromanage. And so I'm pretty much just you're not gonna hear from me, and I just kind of expect results. And so like, and so, which is awesome, which is like exactly how I would prefer to operate, right? Is like, I'll just come back to you when you know, when it's appropriate and when I bring things. And you know, it's been really good. It's a really good fit. Plus, I'm working for a guy that I admire. I admire what he's doing. I think that, you know, he took the jump. I mean, talk about in 2018 when people were laughing at me. I mean, he was tinkering with this in 2016, and people probably didn't even care enough to laugh at him, right? They probably just utterly ignored him. And still, he prevailed and persisted, and he busted his ass for the last 5 years building this. And you know, the first guy through the wall typically gets pretty bloody. And certainly, you know, there's been a lot of bumps, and you know, just inherent to Bitcoin, you know, the price crashes. Think about being the guy that's walking around the oil and gas industry talking about mining on your flare gas when Bitcoin's down 85%. I mean, it's not easy to be that guy. It's easy to be that guy when Bitcoin's back up at 55, right? Everybody wants to be that guy, but nobody wants to be that guy when it's crashing and you just sold somebody a Bitcoin mine or something, right? Like, but Steve,
right.
Steve did it really well, and I think he made a lot of great decisions along the way. And man, it's changed my life entirely. Put it that way.
Dude, we could obviously talk for hours, and hopefully we will at some point again in the future. I love what you guys are doing, and I can't wait to see how it develops. Anywhere you want to direct people if they want to learn more about you or Upstream or anything like that before we shut it down?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, Denver Bitcoin, but definitely check out upstreamdata.ca, and check out, I think it's Upstream Data Inc. on Twitter. Check them out. We're doing some really cool stuff. And beyond that, I will say one other thing I did want to plug real quick was CoinBeast is a company I'm working for. I'm doing consulting with them. I consult with people on Bitcoin mining. They're just a Bitcoin education company, and we have a fair amount of consultants on there. But I consult with people about mining, and then I donate my proceeds, 75% of my proceeds, to a Bitcoin core developer, James O'Byrne. So yeah. You can check me out on CoinBeast if you ever want to.
That's cool, man.
If you want to connect one-on-one, and it'll be for it goes to Bitcoin core development. So and you want to just get to those questions answered about mining that you can't like Google, just that you need somebody that's had some experience. I'd be happy to meet with you, and I don't charge very much. It's not too bad. So that's great, John. Awesome. Thanks so much for having me on here, man. You're the best. I've listened to so much of your podcasts, and I really always value your insight. So to engage with you like this was fantastic, man. I appreciate it.
I appreciate that too, man. And I'm sure we'll do it again soon. So take care.
Yeah, worst case, see you in Miami, huh?
100%. We'll grab some beers.
100%. Cool.